Good morning, Senators. I apologize. It's on me. I got personally stuck in traffic. I want to recognize Senators. The format for this morning is we will proceed with accepting amendments, complete the discussions. I've requested that the representatives who were initially part of the panel yesterday, they make themselves readily available at the public hearing room should we have any subsequent questions or additional questions with regards to issues that are being presented and discussed in Bill number 157-34. We will begin with Vice Speaker Talahi, who I will recognize was here a moment ago, Senator San Nicolas, Speaker Cruz, Senator Tom Atta, Senator Mary Torres, Senator Luis Muña, Senator Will Castro, and Senator James S Pradhan. So as we begin our discussions with regards to the proposed amendments to Bill 157-34, colleagues, just for your information, an invitation was extended on behalf of the Operations Chair of the Legislature and Speaker Cruz, also on behalf of all the senators for Christmas tree lighting event this evening to commence at 6 p.m. If you notice, there's still a number of preparations ongoing. So it is up to you in terms of how we would like to proceed with regards to Bill 157-34. Just keep in mind that there are other business before the legislative body that we should decide when we will continue with other matters once Speaker Cruz reassumes the floor. So I was trying to buy some time so that the Vice Speaker can return to her seat. But Senators, I will at this time, because she's still outside, I would like to invite you to provide any or present any amendments to Bill number 157-34. The Chair is ready to entertain any additional amendments. Senators? Senator San Nicolas, did you want the floor?
I'll yield to the Vice Speaker, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. Senator Nelson, thank you for joining us this morning. Vice Speaker Talahi, you still have the floor on any floor amendments you would like to proffer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was an amendment passed out that I was going to proffer that was going to require an environmental impact statement for expansion on Hotel Wharf. As we know, this is in Upper Harbor, and Upper Harbor is facing many challenges lately because of the temperatures and the coral bleaching and other environmental stresses. And so I just wanted to make sure, but I feel confident that from the representations of the Port's General Manager that this is going to take place because of federal requirements when they get the Tiger grant for improvements to Hotel Wharf. So I'm going to forgo this amendment, Mr. Chair. This is the environmental impact statement relative to the expansion of Hotel Wharf.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker. Any other amendments that you would like to proffer?
Yes. I had also passed out an amendment relative to improvements to the marinas that are not included in this bill. And instead of, they didn't include the marinas as one of the projects, but at the same time, they are going out to increase fees to the marinas. And some of the fees that I saw, they raised the amounts from $100 to $200, and there's a whole scale, but those were quite noticeable, and I am concerned, and I think users of the marinas are concerned about those fees, but I'm going to forgo this amendment. I've also talked to some of the board members of GIDA, and they are looking, the unusual aspect about how GIDA is funded is that it gets paid when they float bonds. They get a percentage. And of course, for those who are not inclined to want a lot of borrowing by the government of Guam, it's a strange way to fund GIDA, I guess, and then it leaves them kind of wanting to borrow more. in order to get more income into their agency. So I hope this is something that we're going to be able to work on in the future, but I'm going to also forego this and leave the marina fees to the PUC's discretion or their system, their public hearing. I hope that, yeah, the marina users are able to effectuate their desires there at the PUC, and that the fees would be reasonable. So I'm going to forego that amendment too. So my final amendment, Mr. Speaker, I did not pass out, but I would like to put this on hold for now and maybe just see what the other amendments are going to be proposed. It was going to be to amend the definition of system. So if it's okay, I would just still like to put a hold on that one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Vice Speaker. We will return to you for an opportunity to be able to revisit the subsection on the definition of system. Any other senators on the floor would like to proffer an amendment on Bill 157-34? Senator Mary Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I passed out a couple days ago an amendment to page 46 of the bill, line 20, and this is just a follow-through of what was discussed previously, where in Section 10220, it provided payments which may be made out of the proceeds of the sale. It provided for payment of costs or expenses relating to the authorization, issuance, or sale of bonds. But in a subsequent section where the appropriations of the funds were allocated very specifically and with set amounts, there was no provision for this authorization. So I wanted to ensure that we, in fact, identify it as one of the items so that there's no mistake that the funds for the issuance of bonds will be taken out of the bond proceeds and won't come out of the port's operating funds or any other unrelated reserve funds. So my amendment, Mr. Chairman, is to line 20, page 46 of the bill, where we insert a new item 4 on section 3, which reads to fund a deposit, or I'm sorry, a new section 4, which reads to pay any cost or expenses relating to the authorization, issuance, or sale of bonds. And we could perhaps put the amount in an amount not to exceed $1.6 million, which would be, if we did the full 80 million, that would be the cost. But to be consistent with all other sections that had specific numbers attached to them, the amendment, a new item 4 would read, pay any cost or expenses relating to the authorization, issuance, or sale of bonds in an amount not to exceed $1.6 million, semicolon, and.
Thank you very much, Senator Torres. Just so that there's clarification, the amendment by Senator Torres, be mindful that sub-item renumbered number 5, those modified numbers, please disregard the content of sub-item number 5, but the intent, Senator Torres, is to renumber the subsequent section, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, because this was passed out way in advance of those amendments.
Understandably, I just want to ensure that we don't go back and reconsider a figure. If you take a look at the $80/$70 million figure, we don't want to reconsider that by virtue of adopting this amendment.
Yes,
so the amendment before us, thank you, Senator Torres, is to insert a new number, new item 4 on section 3, to pay any costs or expenses relating to the authorization, issuance, or sale of bonds, comma, in an amount similar to the language in the other subsections, in an amount not to exceed $1.6 million, semicolon, and. On Senator Torres' amendment, any discussion? Senator S Pradhan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, could I just get maybe a 1 minute to talk to the author of this recess? Because and it concerns the fees, in particular of GITA. I think we passed legislation in which the fees that would be paid towards the Guam Economic Development Authority is from a different source. And so need to understand whether this provision will supersede the law that's in place right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
1 minute recess. Thank you, Senator Espada. Committee in the whole is now back in session. Senator S Pradhan, you had the floor with your additional amendment.
Thank you. Right now, Mr. Chair, I will defer to the mover of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator S Pradhan. Senator Torres?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, circulated is a refreshed copy of the amendment that I proffered to line 20, page 46 of the bill. I want to acknowledge our very astute colleague for pointing out a prior public law that deals specifically with the disposition of fees to GITA and the source of that, which is different from all other fees. So my updated amendment to line 20, page 46, is to insert a new line 4, which reads, pay any cost or expenses relating to the authorization, issuance, or sale of bonds, comma, in a manner consistent with 12 GCA section 50103F, semicolon, and.
Thank you very much, Senator Torres. Any discussion or deliberation on the proposed amendment? Senator St. Nicholas, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the circulated copy, there's language there that states in an amount not to exceed $1.6 million. That's stricken through. I'm actually more comfortable leaving that language in there. And the reason is because while we may assume that the expenses or costs relating to the authorization, issuance, or sale of bonds is narrow, it actually could be very broad. And as an example, I remember a bond that was floated years ago where the agency that was floating the bond or handling the management of floating the bond went on a road show throughout the U.S. to do a sales pitch of the bond. And that's an example of a cost involving the sale. It could be extrapolated to be a cost involving the sale. And then a whole trip for 10 people to go to 6 different states, can technically be considered a cost of the sale. I know that in the 12 GCA section 50103F that's referenced, it talks about the fees for GITA, but that could be arguably a separate line item from a roadshow expense associated with the sale of the bonds. And so in light of that, I think that the $1.6 million figure that's actually in the language that's been proposed, I think it's worth keeping, only because that was what was the stated estimated cost by GITA when they testified, versus striking out an amount and leaving it open-ended. Technically, you can try and figure out any kind of cost that you want and tag it onto this if we do not put a cap on the amount. So I would like to recommend that we include the language in an amount not to exceed $1.6 million. It would be consistent with what the estimated costs were, and it would provide for a cap so that there's no open-ended costs incurred. So I'd like to proffer that as an amendment to the amendment.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, respond?
On the proposed amendment to the amendment, Senator Torres, you recognize.
If we wanted to be abundantly cautious then and establish an amount, I recommend that we further amend it to reflect an amount equal to 2% of what our body authorized, which is $72.6 million in bonds. The figure of $1.6 million was premised on an $80 million borrowing. But if in fact that amount is reduced to $72.6 million, then 2% of that is $1,452,000. So perhaps we can round that up to 1.5 million, and or we can go with 1,452. What do you want, up or down?
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Yes, sir, I understand you're going to be presenting your point of order.
Thank you.
That amendment, because it's an amendment to the primary amendment, unless Senator St. Nicholas rescinds his amendment, I can entertain yours, Senator Torres.
Yeah, mine was just a discussion, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator Torres. On Senator St. Nicholas' amendment to the primary amendment to reinsert in an amount not to exceed $1.6 million. Senator S Pradhan, was I on the mark in terms of your point of order?
No, that was the point of order. You can't make an amendment to the amendment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator S Pradhan. Senator Esteves, on the amendment to the amendment.
Just point of order, Mr. Chairman. I would like to withdraw my amendment and have it my amendment to the amendment and have it restructured as advised by Senator Torres.
Have it
restructured as advised by Senator Torres as an amendment to the amendment.
Okay, Senator San Nicolas has withdrawn his amendment and has yielded to the discussion by the primary sponsor, Senator Torres. Did you want to restate your number?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So the amendment will read as amended. Number 4, pay any cost or expenses relating to the authorization, issuance, or sale of bonds in an amount not to exceed $1,452,000, comma, in a manner consistent with 12 GCA Section 50103F. And
Thank you very much, Senator Torres. On the amendment to the primary amendment, Senator Esteves and then Speaker Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's just more of a question with regards to the way the language is written. Is it just assumed that it's 1.6 million in total? Because as I understand it, they may be going out for a different series of bonds, and I just want to ensure that it's not 1.6 per instance of them seeking a bond related to the total amount authorized in the bill, or with this language as it is, as proposed in the amendment alone, just caps the entire total cost of bond issuance for every single series at 1.6 or 1.5. I just want to make sure, or if we need to just potentially add language to say not to exceed in total 1.5 million, or is this fine as it is? And I think it's just want to bring that up for discussion if we would need to further amend that language.
Thank you very much, Senator Esteves. Speaker Cruz, you're recognized.
We'd probably be better served if we use the 2%, because we don't know what the final issuance is going to be. My amendment that the principal be reduced in the event that any of the loans do not meet the 2%, could reduce the total issuance to less than 72. And if it's just capped at 2%, then it's capped at 2% of the total rather than 140 or rounding it up to 150 or leaving it at 160. The 2% is what is in statute and probably should remain.
Thank you very much, Speaker Cruz. There's been a suggestion, because this is an amendment to the primary amendment, it would have to be, the second amendment would have to be rescinded, with the suggestion by Speaker Cruz, if in fact that's the wish of the body. Any further discussion on the amendment, which still remains in an amount not to exceed $1.42 million in a manner consistent with 12 GCA?
Mr. Chair, I withdraw that amendment to the amendment.
Okay, Senator Torres has withdrawn her second amendment to the primary amendment. Speaker Cruz, you're recognized.
Then I will move that it read 2%, not to exceed the 2% max.
2% of the principal
Total issuance.
of the issuance, okay.
Or 2% of issuance if, as the former, as Senator Esteves mentioned, if there's different series, it's whatever it is, 2% of whatever the series is,
Okay.
rather than the total.
So the language, Speaker Cruz, just so that we are all on the same page, would read in an amount not to exceed 2% of the issuance. And the understanding is that if there are a series of issuances of bonds, then it would be capped at 2%. Okay, everyone understand that? I just added that caveat for the record. On Speaker Cruz's amendment to the primary amendment, Senator S Pradhan, you recognize.
I just want to make sure what the language would be, just to reflect what you had just reiterated to clarify what the intent is. And I believe the intent here is to cap it at 2% if it's just one float or a series of floats for that total amount at 2%.
That's why, Senator S Pradhan, the a caveat was added based on Speaker Cruz's statement that it would read in an amount not to exceed 2% of issuance with an understanding, this is not part of the amendment, with an understanding that it, should there be a series of issuance of bonds, it would still be capped at 2%. So it stated for the
Right.
record the intent of the sponsor of the amendment.
Right, but once it's down in black and white, it'll be a plain reading of it, and it could be misconstrued in spite of the intent. So, and again, that's the reason why, because I believe when the good mover of the amendment made his original amendment to the amendment, he had the word total issuance somewhere in there, right?
Speaker Cruz?
I did, but the concern that Senator Esteves raised was that what if they do it in different segments? I don't want it to read that it's going to be 2% of the supposedly 160 if they're going to get, that they're going to get up that high. 80. But if they do it in a series, then it's 2% of 20, it's 2% of 40, and that's it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just a
Then
point.
Senator S Pradhan, is that based on the language that has been proffered right now in the amount not to exceed 2% of issuance and then comma in a manner consistent, is that sufficient to address your concern?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Espadon. Senator St. Nicholas, on the amendment to the primary amendment.
Just to clarify, so that it will also include in a manner consistent with 12 GCA Section 50.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr.
That's
Chair.
correct. Any further discussion on the amendment to the primary amendment? On the amendment to the primary amendment by Speaker Cruz, any objection? Someone has requested 1 minute recess. committee in the whole is now back in session. I'd like to recognize the sponsor of the primary amendment. Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to withdraw my previous amendments and make a new amendment.
Okay, because we were in the discussion of Speaker Cruz's amendment to the primary amendment. Speaker Cruz rescinds his secondary amendment. Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Okay, so the new amendment, Mr. Chairman, will read line 20, page 46 of the bill, a new section 4, which reads, pay any cost or expenses relating to the authorization, issuance, or sale of bonds in an amount not to exceed 2% of issuance, comma, in a manner consistent with 12 GCA section 50103F as amended by Public Law 34-57.
Just so that everyone is tracking, Senator Torres, if I may, the new number 4 amendment will read, pay any costs or expenses relating to the authorization, issuance, or sale of bonds in an amount not to exceed 2% of issuance, comma, in a manner consistent with 12 GCA, subsection 50103F, semicolon, F, as amended, comma, as amended by Public Law 34-57, semicolon, and. On the amendment now being proffered by Senator Torres, any discussion or questions or comments? Any objections? No objections? So ordered. Thank you, Senator Torres. Senator Torres, you still have the floor.
No further comment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Any other questions or comments on Bill number 157-34 as amended on the floor? Senator Tamata, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask the body that be allowed to reconsider a motion that I had made earlier this week regarding Section 3 on page 45 of the bill. And if I may be allowed to just explain basically what it, the amendment that I made earlier this week was to remove the dollar figures on line 25, line 27 of page 45, and line 2, which are basically could we say the project amounts that will be allowed for each of these capital improvement projects. Now, it is clear that in the case of repaying off the balance of the loan with ANZ and the loan from Bank of Guam and the loan from USDA, that's really pretty much defined, although we only budgeted $20 million to pay off what started out as a $24 million principal amount on those loans. It's probably likely that by the time the bonds the proceeds are received, that in fact there'll probably be less of an amount to be paid. So there's going to be a surplus for these repayments, a surplus which the bill talks that if there's any surplus in these things, then the board can actually decide what else to do with it within the system. But here's the concern that I have. We have projects like, for example, on page 45, the rehabilitation of Hotel Wharf. Now that one, it's already had quite a bit of engineering work that has been put into it. But we're talking about a project that's in the water, and there's just so much, there's still quite a bit that's really unknown in there. The same with, for example, on page 46, item F, the repair of Gulf Pier. Where it's been estimated, and I imagine, there's some rationale that's gone. It wasn't just picked out of the air, but that $2 million might be able to effect the repairs that are needed. But again, once they get down there and they get in the water and they start really getting into the weeds, they may find that $2 million is just not enough. And so the way we have it structured right now is we're saying that you can only put in $2 million worth of repairs on Gulf Pier. Despite the fact that, and so if they need it, let's say 2.5, or they finds out that we need $3 million to fix up Gulf Pier. And Gulf Pier is a critical facility because that's where the bulk of our fuel that is consumed on this island comes through. If we limit them to only $2 million, you know, sure, they're going to get $2 million worth of fixes, but it may not be to the level that we really should apply to that particular facility. So if they needed $3 million, the port could say, okay, instead of spending $17.5 million for the administration building, we're going to cut that down to 15, and we'll sacrifice the office space or the floor space that we were going to build for the shippers to rent, right? Or we may find that, for example, they're gonna cut back on that project to free up some money to be able to do really the fix to Gulf Pier to the level that it should be. We may find that the repair of the equipment maintenance and repair building, which stores their very critical equipment, they may find as they start chipping away, there's a lot more that needs to be repaired, and it's going to cost more than that. But the way we've written it here, you are only limited to $3.6 million. The bottom line is that they could put, they may find that the situation requires that they put more money into one project and less into another. But the bottom line is, and as was frequently said yesterday, at the end of the day, the bottom line is that there's a limit of $72.6 million that will be spent, no more, no less. And so it's for that reason that I would ask the body to reconsider again the motion to remove those dollar figures from these projects, to give them that flexibility to be able to move funds from one project to another. And so that amendment would be to delete then on page 45, line 14, line 27, the 17.5 million, line 2, the 6 million, line 4, the 3.6 million, line 6, and line 8. And if anybody, you know, wants to, it's already in the legislative journal as to how much was the estimated cost. And so it isn't as if, you know, but we've got to give him that flexibility. And so I would just ask the body to reconsider that amendment. And I guess I'm putting the amendment forward as a motion, and we'll leave it to the body to then decide what to do with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Ada. Senator Ada explained his impending amendment, but we need to move for the reconsideration of a previous question that was posed. So the question before the body at this point in time is, will the committee reconsider its decision with regards to what Senator Ada has alluded to? On that first question, any discussion? Senator St. Nicholas, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Specific to the motion to reconsider, basically by reconsidering, we're going to put back onto the table whether or not we're going to remove the amounts that are specified in the Act. The reason why I have a concern with removing those amounts, and the reason why I supported I did not support the previous amendment the first time around, was because if we do not have amounts The full 72.6 million can be borrowed, and it can be allocated however the port sees fit. And granted, there may be some merit to the question of whether or not the port should be given the flexibility based on what those unforeseen costs might be. But the reality is that those unforeseen costs won't materialize until after the indenture is floated anyway, because the bond would need to be floated before the projects even commence. So all we can do is go with the best estimate when the indenture is drafted. If we remove the amounts, then the indenture will basically, could be written in an open-ended fashion. And what that would ultimately result in is the potential for any amount to be used for any purpose, and perhaps for other projects to be even more underfunded. So for example, if we were to remove the amounts for the relocation of the water line, the repair of the EQMR building, the repair of Warehouse 1, and the repair of Gulf Pier, all of those amounts could be lumped into the building of the administration building in the final indenture, because we did not specify what the caps are for those specific projects. Or all of those projects could get scrapped, and it could all be lumped into financing capitalized interest, which would pay for the debt service for X number of years and allow for the tariff increase to be spent on other purposes that are not mandated in this act. So I do appreciate the intent of the mover of the reconsideration for us to try and grant the flexibility, but the reality is you won't know what the unforeseen costs are until the project commences. So for example, with the museum, we didn't know there was a piling problem that was going to be more expensive until after they actually started the construction. And the only time that that cost was realized was well after the indenture was already authorized. So those unforeseen costs, there's no way that the indenture can be written in advance to capture that. So it's important for us to, I think at the onset, make sure that caps are in place to ensure a minimum level of funding for specific projects. If there's going to be additional costs, that's going to have to be funded from an additional measure. The same way that the museum's piling problem had to be funded by additional authorization language. If we had put more flexibility into the Guam Museum bond and all those other associated hot bonds, it would not have allowed for the piling problem to be captured in advance, because that would not have been foreseen, and the amount on the indenture for that specific project would have already been locked in anyway. So there's no real advantage to removing the amounts to prevent unforeseen costs. The advantage to keeping the amounts is that at least it guarantees a minimum. It guarantees a minimum amount that will be committed to these projects. If we remove those amounts, then ultimately the port can decide what minimums they want to put in. And they could technically take all that money and put it all into one building and then neglect all the rest of them, because there's nowhere in this act that actually obligates those projects to be funded other than the minimums that we establish for those specific projects. So I respectfully object to the motion to reconsider. I think having amounts and guaranteeing a minimum allocation would ensure that at the very least those projects get taken care of with that base amount that we establish, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator St. Nicholas. On the question before the body, which is to reconsider a previous action by the body to delete the numerical numbers associated with what Senator Ada had mentioned earlier. Senator Esteves, on the motion for reconsideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the previous speaker for his comments. And the mover, excuse me, the mover of the amendment makes a lot of valid points, and I do agree that they need to be allowed that flexibility. But I think definitely if there are going to be any change orders with the construction or anything big that comes up that we might foresee, I do believe that this body will be able to address it and adjust amounts as necessary once the bond has actually been floated and once we actually have the money. But I think it's really important to state that if there are change orders, especially something that's relatively big, what we're talking about today is information presented to us. And while I understand there are estimates and things could change, I think it's been brought up before that we are the only true fiduciaries within this process at this time. So if there are going to be large change orders or there are going to be changes to the plan, while it's very important that they do have flexibility as the governing policy board at the port and the agency itself as the only responsible fiduciaries of the government in this process, I think they could very easily come back to the legislature to have that quantity change based on a valid justification for the change, i.e. the cost for contamination cleanup is greater than they had anticipated, or they discover something that they had not seen before. I think they're matters of public interest, and as the fiduciaries, I think we're required to address those within this body. I don't think that it's insurmountable that we look at an amendment to the existing statute and if need be, hold an emergency session. Because if there's going to be a change order, there's already a whole process. So upon first notification, I don't see that being a problem with any senator here looking to at least put the question up before the people in the body to make that change as necessary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Esteves. Any further discussion on the motion for reconsideration? There's been an objection, or Senator S Pradhan, you recognize on the motion for reconsideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I appreciate the concerns of the move of the amendment in terms of the flexibility being given to the port, but I also appreciate the previous two speakers who really want to try to at least stay within the range for each of the individual projects, at least so it's basically common knowledge that this is really kind of the amount that you will spend. I guess I take comfort in the wording as it is right now, in that it states in the approximate amount of whatever that amount is. In the case of the relocation of water lines, in the approximate amount of $6 million. It's an approximation. So in essence, they're saying it's going to be around that ballpark. And there is that potential that it could be over, and there's that potential that it could be under. And I would imagine with the wise guidance and decisions of the port in overseeing these projects, they will try to keep it definitely within the budgeted amount. And if there's any potential cost savings or areas that they could, really reduce that amount a little bit so that they could use it in other projects that are listed, then they will do that. So I don't have any problem really with the existing language, but because it uses the wording in the approximate amount. It's not a hard and fast number, but it's in the ballpark of what we intend, what the port intends to spend for each of those individual projects. And so there may be savings in one area that they could then allocate to another area that it's listed here and use those savings to pay for any overruns on the approximations. So I am just to say I am confident that the existing language does give them some flexibility because these numbers are only an approximation.
Thank you very much, Senator Pradhan. Any further discussion on the motion for reconsideration? Senator Ada, did you want to final comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the input from my colleagues. And I just want to point out that back in the 30th Legislature, we did approve then for Guam Power Authority a bond for $155 million, 32-year maturity and all that stuff. And, we basically gave them that latitude that they needed, that it was the money was to be used to pay for a matching portion for the smart grid project, for generation improvements, underground fuel pipelines, and the details of these things was provided during the public hearing and as a part of the committee report and all that. So there's certainly precedent for this, and the utilities have asked for it in the past, and we've given it to them. So I'm just suggesting that we provide the same flexibility to the port. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Ada. On the question before the body to reconsider a previous action, there's been an objection. All those in favor of the question to reconsider, please signify by raising your hands. Motion for reconsideration passes. Senator Ada, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just pick up from some of the other comments that were made earlier. And while it is true, it was pointed out that, you know, if the port should run into a glitch and they find out that, oh my God, we didn't anticipate running into this sort of difficulty or this obstacle, that we can always come back to the legislature. And that's very true. The problem is, though, we may not be able to react enough, and so then everything has to be put on hold. And you know, that delay may cost may cost more money because of the delays. So yeah, while it is true that we can come back, we can act on it, you know, we need to meet the 5-day notice, go in there, do a public hearing, and hope to God that the following week we will, you know, we're talking about probably 60 days to get a bill through, right? Unless the timing is just perfect. But, you know, I'm just commenting on the fact that it's true that we can come back to the legislature and fix what we find is now a new challenge that was anticipated. But will we be able to fix it in a timely manner? Are we going to be causing untimely, you know, unnecessary delays? So, so that's all I'm, you know, that's really the only points that I want to make. It isn't as if they're going to go anywhere with this money. And if they decide that they want to go with a $15 million administration building, or for that matter, a $10 million administration building, because they want to have a really strong fuel pier and a strong hotel wharf, then let them decide to do that, because these decisions are made as more information is obtained. And with the level of information that they have right now, they're anticipating that, okay, you know, $2 million for hotel wharf, $3 million for the EQMR, that would do the trick. But until they get into the details, into the weeds, you really don't know. So give them that flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ada. Senator Ada, I haven't heard you proffer the amendment.
Oh, okay. So I'll proffer the amendment again.
No, just formally on the record.
Okay, so I'm making the motion to remove the dollar figures on those items that I pointed out earlier.
Thank you very much, Senator Ada. The motion is to delete the phrase "and a numerical number" in the approximate amount of, and they are on page 45, line 25, line 27, line 6, line 4 on page 46, line 6 on page 46, and finally on line 8, same page. So on the motion on the amendment, Senator Ada has already discussed it. Senator St. Nicholas, you're recognized, and then Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make it very, very clear that what this language does, this bill, this entire Section 3, this is the authorization of the terms and conditions for the indenture. This has nothing to do with the amount specified for the projects after that indenture is authorized. So if we take out the amounts, we're basically telling the port they can write in whatever amount they want for any of these projects. They can zero out the relocation of the water line if they decide to change their mind on that after we've authorized it. They can zero out the repair of the EQMR building. They can zero out the repair of Warehouse 1. They can zero out the repair of the Gulf Pier. And they can jam all of that into an even bigger administration building if that's what they want to do. The whole point of setting the amounts is we're setting a limit on what projects can be funded to what level in the indenture. So we are setting the terms and conditions of the indenture. You take away the amounts, and they can put whatever amount they want. They can choose to actually defund some of these things. They can jam all of the funding into one project, or they can use all of that money to capitalize the interest, put off paying their bond for 10 years, take the tariff on the back, on the front end, and spend it however they want. The reason why it's so important for us to have amounts here is because this is setting the terms and conditions of the indenture. Now, I very much agree with the mover of the amendment that giving the entity flexibility for unforeseen costs is ideal, but that's not what this does, because you won't even determine if there are any unforeseen costs until after the indenture is effective and the project has already commenced. It is only after the project has commenced that you'll be able to see, oh wow, I didn't know that, the water line on the warehouse building rotted out and we need to replace it, and that's an extra $500,000. Now the problem with that is because the indenture's already been floated, if it's a $500,000 in excess of what's already been authorized in the indenture, the money's going to have to be found somewhere. We cannot prevent that. But by striking the amounts in the bill, we're not going to be allowing for an indenture to be written that's going to provide that kind of flexibility. The indenture is going to be pretty airtight. If we're going to authorize the terms and conditions for the indenture, it's important for us to be setting the parameters upon which that money can be used for. Otherwise, we're basically saying this is what you can fund, but in the end, you're going to decide what it is that you're going to fund in your own indenture. And I'm not comfortable with that, particularly in the context of the capitalized interest section that's still going to be attached to this measure, because you can technically capitalize the interest for so many years and take your tariff and go use it for whatever you want, the tariff increase, because there's nothing mandating that the tariff increase goes specifically to that debt service. If the debt service is already covered under capitalized interest, it becomes almost free cash. So we allowed for a tariff increase to take its course, and it's already effective. The point of that tariff increase was to fund specific projects. And it's important for us to make sure that, at the very least, we identify how much we are anticipating those projects to cost. If, after the project commences, there are unforeseen costs, absolutely we can come back and address it. Like I said, when I was referencing the museum earlier, when the museum ran into their unforeseen costs, we were able to wrap our heads around that pretty quickly. And from my understanding, they were able to find the funding to be able to complete the project. The delay in the museum was actually due to certain equipment issues, but it had nothing to do with the indenture itself. And that's what we're doing here with Section 3. We're creating the parameters for the indenture, the terms and conditions. So I would encourage us to stay focused on trying to have a set, as close to a set amount as we can. That way we can rest assured that all of these projects are at least going to have some level of funding, as opposed to us thinking that they're going to get funded and then finding out after the indenture has been floated and it's locked in for 30 years that things didn't turn out the way we had anticipated. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I respectfully would object to the amendment.
Thank you very much, Senator San Nicolas. Any further discussion, Senator Nelson, on the proposed amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, what is intended with this amendment is that we are removing now the dollar value, which a previous speaker brought up about an approximation of amount. So we're removing the dollar value of every project here. So for example, the Transportation Investment Generating Economic Recovery Grant Program funding for rehabilitation of H-WARF is 14.2 mil. So we're removing that. Replacement of administration building in the approximate amount of 17.5 million. So removing that dollar amount. Relocation of water lines, 6 million. Repair of equipment maintenance and repair building, EQMR, 3.628 million. Repair of warehouse 1, 2 million. Repair of golf pier, 2 million. Are we also removing
the loans from this as well, Mr. Chair? Or is it just the projects itself?
No,
the CIP?
just to line 8, please.
Okay.
That's
So-
correct, right, Senator Abbott?
So to add it all up, that's correct, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay.
Only to line number 8, which is the last figure is $2 million because the others are associated with loans. So, line 8 on page 46.
Okay. So to add it all up, just a minute. That's $45.3 million. So instead of giving them, by the way, this is what they requested, that each project would approximately cost. So because the previous speaker noted that it is approximate amount, that they can still have the flexibility to move certain funding around. But with that, removing all of that, we are going to blanket each project and just say, you are going to get $45.3 million and you figure out where you want to put it. Or, I'm sorry, let me reword that. And if each project is different, you have the flexibility to move it around. I want to make sure that I don't come off too divisive. And the concern I have with this is that our people just received a 7% tariff increase. That's me, that's you, that's everyone out there, because this is our consumers. This is the people buying the goods off the shelves. This impacts our small business. This impacts our, everyone, our teachers. This impacts people that work at the port because they also purchase items on Guam. This impacts what we purchase in our grocery stores. This impacts everything that we purchase. Come January, which is already approved, we are going to, by the PUC, we are going to receive another 7% tax increase, right? So that's 14% within a matter of a year and a half. How are the people going to continue to afford this? Then the year after, another percent. A year after, another percent. And a year after that, another percent. That's 17% tax increase. Our tourism market is being affected because of the globalized threats. Our economy is being affected. The people are being laid off from their jobs, and here we are increasing tariff increase. But yet for this specific project, but yet we want to save $45.3 million, which really does not require any accountability. And I say that because my biggest gripe this whole time has been an approximation of an administration building that has no plan. There's no build, there's no engineer, no architecture design. And now we want to say, okay, Port Authority, here's $45.3 million, do with it as you please. But we're forgetting one important thing. This $45.3 million is coming from the people's pocket. It's coming from their hard work. And if we don't have a certain left and right limit what they can do and accountability in place for the port leadership, this has nothing to do with the ability for the port to function, but the leadership to be accountable, then this sends the wrong message that because other autonomous agencies have done it in the past, that we're going to be okay with it today. I'm not okay with it. I'm not okay that some autonomous agencies got the flexibility to do what they wanted, because it affected me. It affected our families. I'm definitely not okay with it. So I have to object this this amendment respectfully. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Nelson. Any further discussion on the proposed amendment? Senator Esteves? Other than Senator Esteves and Senator Ada, anyone else? If not, Senator Esteves, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To echo some of the concerns of a previous speaker, when you're looking at these amounts with regards to the bond indenture, it's important you got to look at them. The intent is that these are we're authorizing series of bonds. So each one is going to come with some minimums and some maximums, but that adjustment is going to affect the terms of its maturity. So if you look at the Tiger Bomb at 14.2 million, that's probably going to be a 25 to 30-year maturity. And the longer that maturity is, at the interest rates that we've approved in this body, we're going to be paying more in interest. So that up or down on those larger amounts and that flexibility go from 14.2 to 17 million could have a drastic change and effect on the interest. That what we're approving here is not necessarily going to be what actually happens. Same thing with the 17.5 million, 25 to 30 year. 6 million, probably a 5-year maturity. 2 million, 5-year maturity. 2-year, the other 2 million, another 5-year maturity. After talking with Gita, you know, most people in the market, they don't buy 10 to 15-year bonds. So you're pretty much looking at a 5-year maturity, 2 to 5-year maturity, or a 25 to 30. So it's either going to be a really big borrow on one series or a really small borrow. So I think it's important because those larger borrows and that adjustment in numbers, that interest rate is just going to kill us over the long period of time. Now, I understand there's nothing preventing them from paying it back sooner, but if we're passing a bond and authorizing the borrowing, these numbers really kind of address what we're approving with regards to the terms, with regards to what was put out and the information that was put out and told to us as we deliberate to pass this legislation. So if I'm understanding this is an estimate, and this is what the terms are going to be, and I'm calculating what the interest might look like with an assumption of 20 to 30 years, and then they have the flexibility to change it to 17, 17.5, then what we deliberated on and what we voted on and we talked about and eventually come to agree and to terms with is mute. Then why are we here? None of the information that was put out publicly is going to be accurate. It could be, I mean, we run the potential of the information being put out here today in front of us and to the public is not being actual. So, I mean, I do understand it can be encumbersome, but it's encumbersome for a reason. Again, I'd like to reiterate, the legislature within this process and in what we do moving forward with the bond, the legislature is the only fiduciary authority. We're the only ones with the fiduciary responsibility. If the port misspends, you might see a news article, but who are they going to blame? They're going to blame this body, whether we're here or not. And that's something to consider because it is our responsibility to ensure that what is being told to us when we pass or choose not to pass this legislation is accurate both now and accurate both tomorrow after they've been given the authority to go do it. So while I understand the sentiments of the mover of the amendment, and I do appreciate them in so many ways, I do have to object to the amendment itself.
Thank you very much, Senator Esteves. Senator Ada, did you want to close on your amendment? Or, I'm sorry, Senator Morrison?
Mr. Chair, I support the amendment, Mr. Chair. We could learn from recent past with the hot bond and dealing with the Guam Museum and how we went through many series of legislations and we ended up just lifting the cap. The concerns we were having with those projects or list of projects, I think there was over 50 throughout the island, and they're all important, but the major project with that hot bond was the Guam Museum. And we didn't want to compromise those other projects. But we can learn from recent past, Mr. Chairman, that we ended up spending more time, more costs, coming back here trying to figure out how to move that museum along. And we ended up just agreeing to lift the cap and allow Gita, at the request of Gita, to move forward and manage where savings can be realized and get that Guam Museum done. So I appreciate the concerns made by my colleagues. However, I do agree with the author of the amendment and learning from recent past and how we can allow the experts to move these projects along. Again, we can always come back as we do the updates on the projects and see where things are at, as we did with all the hot bonds. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Morrison. Senator Atta, you may close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was one concern that was raised that if we remove those budget amounts, let's call it budget amounts for each project, that it's possible that the port could zero out the projects and build a palatial administration building and move every mother's uncle in there. But really, in all practicality, do we really think that that's going to happen? And maybe that's the difference. Maybe I'm not as cynical, and maybe I'm more trusting, but I don't think that that's going to happen. And then the other comment was made was that if the budget is exceeded, then that's it. You go find the money elsewhere. But then what that means is it's going to have to come from their operations, unless from their operations revenues, which basically means having to defer other important operational activities. And so we're just saying if we can mitigate as much of the variables that inevitably they will run into as these construction projects go underway, then certainly. But the bottom line is that I guess it's kind of like the difference between my requirement of you is that when you go out in public, you put on clothes. But what we're doing is we're basically saying, yeah, but I also want you to wear a button-down shirt, and it's got to be gabardine pants with 50% wool, and whatever. And that, that's micromanaging. And I think from a policy level, we would just want to say, you're not going to spend more than $72.6 million. You already told me that these are the projects that you're going to do. And so, you better come through with it. So I just ask my colleagues to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Atta. Senators, on Senator Atta's amendment on sub-item A, pages 45 and 46, to delete the words in the amount of $14.2 million. Sub-item B, in the amount of $17.5 million. Sub-item C, in the amount of $6 million. Sub-item D, in the amount of approximately $3.628800, and then sub-item E in the amount of $2 million, and sub-item F in the amount of $2 million. On the amendment by Senator Atta, there's been an objection. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by raising your hands. Amendment fails. Senators, we will recess until 2 p.m. this afternoon, understanding that we will continue deliberation until 4 for today. Thank you very much, Senator.